Welcome to another edition of Everybody Hates Cleveland.com, the podcast. This is number 48. We are closing in on that fateful number 50. The question is, Mike, who's going to host number 50? I think it'll be a fight.
I'm betting it's you. I'm putting big money on Jim Pete.
I think what we ought to do is we could do like an online if you're watching on the video. If you're listening, this is going to be terrible. But if you're watching online, Mike and I are preparing to arm wrestle.
That's true.
From about 90 miles apart.
Very possible.
It's not going to, because there's really no way for our hands to touch, which is probably a good thing, but we're kind of getting off track. This is actually the first time Mike and I have podcasted in, it seems like years, but it's only been a couple weeks. This is what happens when you podcast every week.
I know. We're podcasting so much now. It's delightful. But, the flagship podcast has been lacking.
It all comes, maybe that's what we should call it, the flagship. Then we don't need titles. Our podcast, we could both be the flagship of EHC. That's audacious.
I don't know, Jim. I just don't know if anybody's going to take me seriously unless I have some title on a blog site that doesn't matter, but I'll see what I can do.
I think it all comes back to, I think we should all have like historic reference titles. Like, someone could be the Caesar and we could have someone as the Führer. Maybe not that one.
We're gonna scrub that, right? I'll be the Rock of Chickamauga because I love George Thomas. We should Civil War fan, so I enjoy that.
Let's call Grimm up. He's part of EHC in some form. He could be our title giver.
He's what we aspire to be, really, in terms of being snarky. He's what we all wish we were.
Well, and I'm slightly concerned. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm slightly concerned about him. The Zach Walters thing. I'm worried that we aren't going to see Mr. Grimm for weeks or months, or else he's going to be a Dodgers fan.
Both possibilities. Both.
I suppose we should probably talk about Cleveland sports at some point. Maybe not. Maybe we're better at this. If you're just joining us, first of all, thank you for hitting our podcast. We're going to talk about Cleveland sports real quick, kind of plug at the beginning here. Go check out iTunes. Click a rating. That's really all we need. Just click a rating. Give us a 4, give us a 5, give us a 1, give us a 2. Drop a comment. We'll read your comments on air, and someday we'll give something away for free. We got to at least get to 15. Once we do that, we'll throw something to those 15 people. And I mean a legit 15 because, just to kind of throw it out there, Mike and I also have reviewed our own. So, I'm not afraid to admit that. I think we're awesome.
I gave us a 1 because I think I'm a little bit too hard to listen to. So, there's that. But
you are sporting, and I guess you can't hear it in the podcast, but you are sporting a spiffy tie today.
I do look quite dapper. So if everyone would like to go to the YouTube feed and see me at my very best, I do recommend that.
He does look very fine. He's not quite sporting the sweatshirt like I am, but he does look stylish. All right, Mike, let's talk. And we do, well, we'll get to this at the end. Well, I guess, we could talk about rain delays because that's apparently what's going to happen forever if Cleveland plays baseball in the North. But we've got a lot of kind of fun things to talk about. I think the first thing I want to talk about, Mike, is, and I'm going to throw you for a loop here, and I know we did not talk about this off air, but we have talked about this in past podcasts. And the teams that have been playing after Columbus was rained out for 14 or 15 days in a row, they did get some baseball in yesterday. And I think the one thing that we can say about all of our minor league teams is we've had some pretty tasty rotational prospects show their face. The one I want to talk about, though, is one that we talked about in a previous podcast, in our rotation podcast, and that's Mike Clevenger. He came out of the gate smoking yesterday. And, without really talking stats or anything, is we look at the Indians' rotation right now. Our top 4 looked varying degrees of good, some bad, but the bad was Kluber and to some extent Carrasco at the beginning and the end of his start. Perhaps some handling issues there. But, our rotation looks solid. This Clevenger start's interesting to me only in that Tomlin's never going to start because of rainouts. So could this be, and we talked about this in the podcast, but could the Indians have maybe protected Bauer, protected Clevenger, and even maybe a guy like TJ House who needs more regular work, but could they have just simply been protecting these guys in April, knowing location of starts. I mean, they're starting in Cleveland, weather is bad. Starting in Chicago, weather is bad. Tomlin's not going to get, he's got a scheduled, I think, simulated start tomorrow. He's not going to get live bats here until sometime tail end of April if he's lucky. Are they just waiting for these guys to be able to get regular starts in the summer, warmer weather, a lot more regular starts? Is that really what we're doing with Clevenger? I mean, he looks like the real deal, and you have to think the Indians know that.
I think so. I also think the Indians are in a position where they don't know what to do with all this pitching depth. And maybe it's not that. I don't think that that's fair. I should say we as fans don't really know what to do with all this pitching depth, because I think, they couldn't put Clevenger in this rotation on opening day without basically, I don't think you can have Bauer and Tomlin in the bullpen. And I think Anderson deserved, a spot in the rotation because of what he did last year, because of how he pitched this spring and sort of how the upside shifted. So I think it was, kind of impossible to put Clevenger in the rotation, but he's ready. I mean, he's ready to go. And he's been ready since before spring training started, I think is pretty clear. So I do think it's something where they're protecting Clevenger, and they're also a little bit just tied up in terms of what they can do. They have a lot of quality starting depth, and it's going to be really sort of ugly for a couple of guys in terms of the reps they're getting.
Yeah, I keep coming back to this rotation. I don't know if it's the most exciting thing to talk about or boring to talk about, because we talk about it so much at this point, but it's rare for Cleveland sports fans to have this, when you have a lot of these other guys, today we got Kaminsky going on the hill, and we'll finally get to see him slowly come back from his injury issues last year. We have a slew of these top prospects now slowly filtering their way into the top 10. It's just kind of fun to kind of take that into account. Looking at the rotation, Mike, any concerns whatsoever? I mean, we got Kluber struggled a bit, cold weather day, really bad weather day, opening day for the Indians. Salazar looked decent. Anderson looked decent. Carrasco, like I said, was kind of bookended by struggle, didn't really have his best stuff, but still seemed to kind of power through it. Anything that come out of the first week for you with this rotation, other than weather, that are concerning?
No, I don't want to rush to judgment. I will say that I was a little concerned. Anderson got dealt a really raw deal with just atrocious defense. I would say that I'm concerned in that he was the same Anderson in that he kept getting ahead of guys, and the fastball velocity was up, which is really exciting, but he isn't putting guys away yet. And I don't know if that's just going to take more time, but he's still not sort of getting the strikeout rate I'd like to see from him to really feel like he's made that leap. And I think it's just going to take a little evolution. He has this newfound velocity. The curveball looked really nice, actually. I thought the curveball looked really good. He got a couple swings and misses, especially with Frazier. I'd like to see it used more, and I just think that finding the pitch mix with Anderson is going to take a little time. It's exciting, but it's not there yet. I don't think this sort of evolution is done, and it's a little more time.
Well, I think the fun thing with that too is Anderson's never been a guy who's had an out pitch. I mean, he's always been a guy who's had to work corners and had to work edges, and with this newfound velocity and maybe a few inches or two on the curveball, a couple, maybe an inch. But maybe as he starts working some of this in, this is something that develops. And I think the one thing that we've learned with this current Indians team, especially with this coaching staff, with Callaway, with the types of players that they bring in, evolution fits quite well. And we'll get into that with a couple of players here as we progress through this very quick podcast. But over the weekend, Mike, and you and I both like to delve into minor league stuff. There was a pretty interesting discussion yesterday on level of prospects with Lindor up. I think the next two on the list, probably one right now would be Bradley Zimmer, and 1A would be Clint Frazier. My question, let's focus our energies though right now on Bradley Zimmer, and an interesting kind of topic of conversation on Twitter erupted yesterday, comparing Zimmer being potentially the best offensive prospect we've had in 20 plus years. Now, you and I both have followed prospects, and there have been varying degrees of kind of letdowns over the years with Indians prospects, from the Laportas to the Bo Mills, so on and so forth. But an interesting kind of comp popped up yesterday. with regards to Zimmer, and that was to a former center fielder for the Indians who people forget how good he was, especially in the minors, and that's Grady Sizemore. Sizemore, of course, came over to the Indians in 01, maybe it was 02, and the deal with the Expos for Bartolo Colon, who, my God, is still pitching. But another fun conversation there. But, is there a true comp between these guys? Both play center field. Both seem to be pretty good defenders. Both seem to have pop with the bat. I think there are some interesting kind of comparisons there. I think, Sizemore came out of high school and had a little bit more development underneath him, whereas Zimmer is a college guy, hasn't really been in the minors all that long. Let's talk in kind of surface comparisons. There are some similarities there, aren't there?
Yes, this conversation feels a lot like entrapment for me, partially because I think the prospect hubris with Zimmer has gotten a little crazy. And I hate having this conversation because I think we live in this sort of like vacuum where you get guys in the system and they play well, and every single prognosticator doesn't want to be wrong about how good they can be. So these ceilings become limitless sort of items. And that it's tough to say, hey, let's tap the brakes a little with our expectations, or at least, be honest about imperfections. So I'm gonna do that. They are somewhat similar. They play center field.
Well, and to balance what you said, though, just real quick, to balance what you said, like Zimmer's ceiling has like exploded. Like you look up and you see like heavenly gates, and to comp that, I think people have forgotten the prospect. People have forgotten the prospect that Grady Sizemore was. Part of it because he was so bad at the tail end of his career. And I think part of it because they just forget how good he was. And, he really was a good, solid minor league player. So you're kind of on opposite ends of the teeter-totter looking at this conversation, because I think Sizemore was probably better than people give him credit for in the minors because they don't look back. And I think Zimmer right now has this kind of, oh my gosh, we got Lindor. Here's our next Lindor.
Yeah, he was even compared to Lindor, and I think Lindor is a fairly aggressive comp in terms of Zimmer's future value. I mean, I think that's sort of underappreciating Lindor, and I don't want to sideswipe anyone. I think this is just a really important conversation to have in terms of expectations about Zimmer, because I really worry when you get these guys to Cleveland. And I think Zimmer is going to have a really solid big league career, but I think that the ceiling with him is lower than people think. I think the great value in Zimmer is that he has good speed. He has good power. He can defend right field and left field well, and he might even be able to play center. He can, so I think the value is he has this sort of nice total package, which creates a really good floor that we know that, he's going to likely be productive. I am really scared about the strikeout rate with Zimmer, and I beat this horse to death, but strikeout rate, really good research has been done on, what the best predictors of major league success are for minor league hitters, and strikeout rate is it. I mean, we have strikeout rate, we have walk rate, and we have ISO, and BABIP is the fourth most important. And strikeout rate's a huge deal. So let's talk about, the Indians' four best hitters last year: Santana, Lindor, Brantley, Kipnis. All of them had strikeout rates below 20% in the big leagues, okay? None of them ever had strikeout rates at any level of 20% in the minor leagues. Zimmer, at 22 in A-ball, struck out 23% of the time. And he was hurt in Double-A, but he struck out 25% of the time. These things increase. And what this does is really puts a ceiling on how high his batting average can be. If you're not putting enough balls in play, there's a distinct ceiling on how high your batting average can be. And strikeout rate does that. Interestingly,
I think, and just a real quick aside here, I think the thing you have to understand about K rate too, and this is why it's such a good indicator, and just to kind of understand this, when you're dealing with minor league pitchers and you're dealing with putting the bat to ball, and I think you and Adam really did a nice job talking about this with a couple of specific players, Lindor included. And Brantley was a guy like this. Putting the bat head on the baseball is a really good indicator at any level, but it's hard to judge in the minor leagues. But when you're not putting the bat head on the baseball in the minor leagues with pitchers who aren't as good as the players in the majors, I mean, obviously the indicator, is easy to parallel to a major league deal. So if you're listening, I mean, it's clear, like that's why K rate to me has always been a big deal. That's why I was always fairly high on Brantley. Both of us were, just for the simple ability to put the bat head on the baseball. And the same goes for Lindor. And I think the one thing that people miss with Lindor is he puts puts the bat on the baseball, so he's not going to K a lot. So anyways, just an aside there, it just seems like people miss out on the easy things.
Yeah, if you look at the other guys we're high on, I'm high on Yandy Diaz a little bit. I'm really high on Jose Ramirez. And I've always been on Santana, and these are because the guys put the ball in play. And, you can improve sort of contact authority, but becoming a guy who instantaneously just makes more contact seems to be a lot more challenging than people admit. But the other thing is, if you compare where Zimmer and Frazier are, Frazier's a 20-year-old who improves his strikeout rate by 8%, which is relatively unheard of. He posted 21% strikeout rate in A-ball, while Zimmer, who's 2 years older, which matters with prospects, posts 23%. I think it's really responsible of us to say that there are more concerns to me right now in terms of Brad Zimmer's swing and miss ability than there are with Clint Frazier. And I think that we need to be more honest about the fact that, hey, this is a ceiling limit right now that if Zimmer doesn't address it, it could really get ugly as he moves up.
Well, and this is, I'm probably, people are going to be listening to this podcast. They're going to hear me say the term IQ, and I apologize. I keep coming back to this. And, when I see a player like Frazier last year, and I don't have the split sitting in front of me, his K rate, at the tail end of last year, 21.3, its rate sitting at 20 now. And I know it's early in the year, but if you look at the progression that he's made throughout his career from low ball, from 29.7, in low A from Lake County to 21.3 in Lynchburg last year. That you want to talk about learnability and IQ. That's what that is. And you talk about power potential too with Frazier, as well as the defense. He's never had a knock with defense. You're looking at a guy in Frazier who a lot of people are, again, people are going to hear me say this and kind of deep breath it. But, when Kipnis and Chisenhall were coming up, I was massively high on Kipnis in comparison with Chisenhall. And again, I joke on Twitter. I'm not as low on Chisenhall as I make it out to be. I get that a lot of people are high on Zimmer, maybe because he's a little bit closer. But I think the ceiling for Frazier, I think that, we talk about the floor, Mike, and we've talked about how maybe Zimmer's floor is higher. Is it? He's 2 years. And this is when age comes into play for me. I think there's more power there. I think the defense is equitable. I think Frazier's because of that IQ, and I'm not saying Zimmer doesn't have it, but I think that Frazier's just a kid who gets it. I think he was scouted really well. I think there's a level of scouting right now with the Indians where they're finding these high IQ kids, and they've been doing it, I think, for the past 4 or 5 years. And Frazier, to me, fits the bill.
Guys who are willing to make adjustments, do it in season, and continue to improve. The interesting thing about Frazier is there have been some criticisms about, when the power is coming. This is a guy who cut his strikeout rate by a huge margin as a guy who's young for the league and added ISO. That's very, very rare. And that speaks to someone's ability to make adjustments to succeed at a level. And, honestly, we haven't seen that from Frazier, from Zimmer yet. I don't want to create this bash-a-thon with Zimmer. I like Zimmer's floor because I think he can defend right field at above average. I think he can steal you 15 bases, hit you 15 homers, and hit 250. That's really useful. That's like a 3-WAR player. But I think the ceiling I'm really worried about with him because this K rate is a really large concern. I think expecting it to be lower than it is in the big leagues than it is in Double-A is absolutely foolish. And right now in Double-A and High A, he's not shown anything exciting in terms of the K rate. It looks like a major wart. So I'm very, I think the risk with Zimmer is much higher. I shouldn't say that. I think the ceiling's lower than people think it is. I'm concerned. So unless he starts hitting 40 homers a year with that K rate, you really have to have a lot of power to cover that sort of K rate to make it to like a star level player. He can be a very good player. He can be an above average player. But the K rate is a handicap for him that he has to address.
Well, and again, I'm not saying it always seems like we get into these, comparison battles where one player has to succeed and the other one doesn't. At the end of the day, these are two fantastic prospects. I just think, playing field equal, both at the same level, one a lot younger than the other, who's made excessive developmental changes. You know, if you look at, I think looking at the splits for Frazier last year, you know, he comes back after the break and hits during the second half of the season last year, hits almost 340 with that split, and hits. You can obviously tell that a lot of these changes he was making at the beginning of the year were finally starting to take shape. It's going to be interesting to see how the Indians handle both of these kids who are playing Double-A baseball right now, because, you know, right now Frazier is, developmentally seems to be making more moves, but is younger, and traditionally the Indians have held back their younger players. You know, with these sell-offs that the Indians are making right now, Walter's going away, Ramsey going away, Soto going away, it does, Mike, seem like they're clearing out the books a little bit. Could it be that they're clearing out the books not just for one of these guys, but perhaps sometime in May or June we might see both Frazier and Zimmer? And I probably should have said that other way around. Could Zimmer and Frazier be on their way up? I mean, could we be underselling Frazier? I mean, might they see him as a guy who can maybe knock on the door a lot faster?
I think it's possible. I want to see if he can make another sort of K rate improvement and drop it under 20% as a 21-year-old in Double-A. I think the trajectory gets a lot faster. I mean, a lot faster. I think, and we're going to have a nice, once you get to sort of a 200 at bat sample, which is about May 30th, that's when you can sort of start making these decisions about how aggressive you want to be with Clint Frazier. I don't think it's out of the question. I think people really draft what people say about players on draft day becomes these absolute truths that we accept about them for freaking years afterwards. And people fail to sort of adapt when players adapt and how they evaluate players. It drives me friggin' insane. It's not that hard. You draft players with certain notions about their tools, and then you watch their tools mature and you see how that happens. And there's this notion that, Frazier's this prep guy. There's no way he can move as fast as Zimmer. Zimmer's this polished college bat. Well, show me the polished college bat. Show me the improved K rate. And show me that you can hit guys who are your age or younger. And Frazier's shown me he can hit those guys. And they both had good seasons last year. I don't want to pick on Zimmer. He's a good prospect. But Frazier showed me a heck of a lot more last year. A heck of a lot more.
I'm still stuck on it because I think I can't remember which site it was. It might have been Let's Go Tribe. I just remember reading right after he was drafted, and I was covering that for IBI at the time. Right after he was drafted, I remember reading someone saying he's a quote unquote, this is Frazier, he's a quote unquote poor man's Mike Trout. And I remember thinking to myself, I mean, I felt bad comparing Zimmer to Sizemore, who to me, Sizemore, again, people forget how good he was and how good he was in the minor leagues. But these statements that people make, and they put them in a box. And, the fun thing about Lindor to me, you want to talk about putting a guy in a box, is, and you and I have had conversations enough about him. You knew, putting an eye on a player, and I'm not overstating my scoutiness. Do people knock on my door and say, you could be a good scout, Jim? No, but you put an eye on a player for a while, and you connect it with all the stats that you look at for years and years and years. And, I kept watching these people say, well, he can never hit 300. And I kept thinking to myself, I kind of think he can. And I don't know, you get these players, and I think we're in an era, Mike, where look at Santana, where you have a picture of who a player is, and if he doesn't match that picture, you either bash him or you praise him. Is Frazier really the next Mike Trout? Of course not. But could he be a really good player? Yes. Does that make him a poor man's Mike Trout? I mean, come on. And with Zimmer, who he's 6'4". Sizemore was big too. I mean, I don't know. Comparisons to me, do you compare? I don't know. Who could we compare Manny Ramirez to? How's that for serving you up one?
Oh, God.
No, just stop there. All right. Well, I don't know. I still think Zimmer, they're really high on Zimmer. I just, when you step back, Mike, and we talked a lot about the outfield, and you look at some of their kind of quizzical moves, especially as we closed in on the season. Rajai Davis, Marlon Byrd certainly aren't, future prospects. Do you think in the end when we talk about guys like Zimmer and we talk about guys like Frazier, doesn't it make sense to you that the Indians didn't make a move, even with Brantley? And think about this. Brantley and Chisenhall are out. 2/3 of our outfield. Almonte's out. Okay, our starting outfield is out. They didn't make any tangible moves other than Rajai Davis and Marlon Byrd and Cowgill and bringing up Naquin. I mean, all these are like moves that you make in a year where you're not trying to contend. Doesn't this become pretty clear? Like, isn't it clear? They don't want anyone to clog up the outfield.
I think that's true. I also think when the Chisenhall and Almonte things happened, I kind of think it's like there's no planning or adapting you can do when your three starting outfielders are hurt, suspended for steroids, and hurt. Like there's a limit in like, people act like the Indians are like really dumb for running a quadruple A outfield out there, end quote. It's like, what team in baseball is like, oh, well, we have 3 guys. 2 of them might be hurt for the first 2 weeks of the season. Let's go trade for 2 other big league starting outfielders to address the problem. Like, that's not a solution. That's not a solution any team is going to make. That's not a functional solution or a functional critique. I mean, I think there is something to, if they acquire 2 more legit starters, then they have this huge logjam they're going to deal with in a year, maybe in 3 or 4 months. I mean, to me, the outfield situation's a mess. It's frustrating, but we have Brantley and Chisenhall playing in rehab games tomorrow night. Could be back within a week. You only have 10 games where Brantley and Chisenhall miss after what we've seen this offseason. That's a really good outcome.
Well, and I think we'll save this for another podcast, get some more games under our belt. But, the thought of Brantley in particular lengthening this already clearly improved lineup. And I know it's early, but you have this cold weather lineup, putting the bat on the ball with Napoli in the middle, who's playing well, and Santana, who's playing well, out of the gate. Again, we're 4 games into this. Having Brantley come back offensively really does lengthen this lineup, doesn't it? I mean, if we look at what we have right now with J-Ram playing well, with Lindor in the upper part of the order, and they're shuffling him from leadoff to batting third, even batting second. They have some very interesting interchangeable parts. And we'll kind of wrap things up here, Mike, but what have you thought of the handling of a couple of things? Our boy J-Ram has – he's played in the outfield. He's played in left, center. He had a start scratched playing third base. It's clear that J-Ram is the 2016 version of Mike Aviles. And when I say that, I don't mean with perception. I mean with how Tito Francona is handling him. He's clearly immediately assumed that role.
Except he's like actually good at baseball. But yeah, I totally agree.
Right. I think, and again, the knock on Aviles for all of us last year was just simply, his role at that age, and that, certainly he wasn't athletic. Having a non-athletic guy who doesn't ever play center is kind of the wrong way to go. You can even knock Ramirez in left field because he kind of looks fun out there. He could just overcome it with speed and agility, which Mike Aviles doesn't have. But what kept the Indians? I mean, why the hell didn't the Indians do this last year? Anyways, what are your thoughts on J-Ram right now? I mean, he's clearly playing as though he knows his role. He clearly has the moxie, and you hear me throw that, and I'm not trying to piss people off by using this mystical word, but he's clearly a part of this team now, and he's clearly going to get 400 to 450 at bats.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I will say, Jim, I think that you and I played a lot more competitive baseball than a lot of people who scout on here. I've played the outfield. I wasn't good, wasn't great. Played all over the East Coast a couple of times. I mean, it's whatever. I'm not a great baseball player. I'm not going to act like I'm a scout. But if you watch J-Ram in left field, you get concerned pretty quickly. I really his athleticism is covering so much. I think having watched 3 games of him out there, 2 games, 3 games, I think he's read about 1 out of 10 to 15 balls correctly off the bat. Some of them were just softly hit enough that he could get away with it.
It doesn't take rocket science. I mean, if you've ever stepped in the outfield, and had somebody who can hit a ball towards you, I mean, it's dramatically different than playing shortstop and catching a fly ball or second base. Velocity, just think of the range of places you can hit the ball in the outfield as opposed to second or short. I mean, there's so many differences. And I again, like, my concern is less about Ramirez looking like a fool out there. My concern is, why the hell hasn't he been out there the entire spring? He can play the infield. Like, why the hell are we all of a sudden putting him in center and left? It seems insane to me, because you and I both know it takes time to start to judge this stuff. Those balls come back there pretty fast, and there's a whole lot more place to cover.
Yeah. So I don't get that. Like, it seems like the way Francona's played him the first week, that it was clear all along that J-Ram was going to play 2 or 3 times a week in the outfield. And he played in the outfield, 3 times in like 30 games in the spring? That's a really great idea, Terry. Thanks for that.
I mean, I literally, this is shocking to me. And you look at the lineup, and then all of a sudden he's playing third, and I'm thinking, what am I missing?
Seriously.
So I don't know. And again, this kind of brings us back to this conversation about Aviles, and perception. What are we being perceived to judge these players by? People are slamming Ramirez for going out into left and looking like a buffoon when he should look like a buffoon. Like, now he's going to be playing third base. And, I'm not saying that he can't be a serviceable third baseman. I mean, he can play the infield, so he can field the balls. But, you and I both know playing third base is different than playing short in a dramatic way, and different from playing second in a dramatic way. When you're playing third base, there's just a whole lot of difference, especially when you're playing up, because you got the shortstop playing back. And again, this is a guy who doesn't play a lot of third base. Is J-Ram being set up to fail? I don't know.
I think he is in some ways. I'd say that I think he's much more up to the challenge. I mean, he played a little third last year and looked really good. But
it's just playing all over the place. It's concerning to me in that, was he prepped for it?
I don't think he was, and I think it's scary. I really think they put him in a predicament where it's really tough for him to come out looking successful. I do think one positive thing they did, he played much farther back in the outfield. Yes, the last game in Chicago, which I thought was a good idea. I think he's super athletic. You try and set him up so he can only run laterally and sprint in on balls. I think one of the really tough things for people converting is guys who have to run down balls over their heads. I think that looks really bad when you have an infielder who's trying to shift out there at first. So I think, that's a good sort of solution for them. Yeah, but it's a tough position to be in for J-Ram.
Well, the plus for him, to me, is he's going to get more at bats. And I think, as we've seen at almost every level that he's played, the more at bats he gets, the more he kind of gets in tune with the pitching. The level of pitching. I think offensively, we've seen him in the lineup kind of in some interesting places. He's batted second and he's batted ninth, which, to me, if you were to say, what are your top 2 spots for J-Ram, those would be my top 2 spots for him. So I think, positionally, I think it'll be kind of fun to watch the year progress, especially as some of these outfielders start to either move up or start to come back, obviously with Chisenhall in the lineup. And with Brantley in the lineup, his outfield at bats are going to diminish some. It seems to me clearly that the plan all along is for him to platoon in some sort of way with Uribe, to give Uribe a lot of rest at third base. So I think we're going to see him quite a bit at third. And like I said, as the season progresses, I think you're going to see Lindor and I mean, I don't know. He's not going to play first base, but I think Lindor and Kipnis are going to see rest there. And we'll probably even see him at DH. I think we're going to get the over-under on 450, Mike.
Yeah, he'll get there.
Yeah, I think he'll get there.
At least PAs. He'll definitely get 450 PAs.
So
he
we
walks
should,
enough things.
yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm curious to see what he can do with the bat. You know, I got into an interesting kind of argument about that with somebody, I can't even remember who it was, but you know, someone who doesn't think he's got the offense to play at the big league level. And I think, well, it depends on what you're looking at. I mean, if you're looking for a 30-30 guy, no, but I think, you know, if you're looking for a guy who can get on base and can wreak some havoc, I think he's a guy who can get, you know, if he gets the at bats, he'll get, you know, he'll get on base 31% of the time. And he can steal 30, 40 bases if he gets the chance. I mean, I don't know that he'll do it at the big league level because I don't know that 450 at-bats is going to get him enough, but plate appearance is going to be enough, but we shall see. Any takeaways, Mike, from the first week aside from weather sucks?
Napoli and Santana look really good next to each other, but I have some concerns about wasting how good they are next to each other.
And listen, I mean, you and Adam had a fantastic conversation about that. So check out our archives. Adam Burke and Mike Hattery were talking about the middle of our lineup and the ability for them to get on base, not only hit home runs, which everybody seems to focus on. But yeah, Mike, talk a little bit about that just real quick. You know, they're gonna clearly be the middle of the lineup 4-5. What's your biggest concern, and who's your biggest concern maybe hitting behind them? It seems like Gomes offensively is going to be playing pretty well. Again, he's not an on-base guy, though.
Yeah, I think the one concern I have is you have these guys who are really good at getting on base. And when you need guys who make a lot of contact, who to follow guys who are on base all the time, essentially. So you ideally, you know, you would have someone like Brantley or Jose Ramirez or Francisco Lindor behind them, you know, guys who have really low K rates, who put the ball in play a lot. Because when you have guys on base, all you want to do is put the ball in play. So I think that's the best fit. Gomes behind them, I'm really high on Gomes, you know, performing better this year. I think he's made some adjustments that are really positive, but I think he strikes out a little bit too much unless we see that, you know, seriously check down to really maximize how valuable Napoli and Santana are. So I'll let you close it out.
Well, you know, I just think the big thing with our lineup, lengthening it, and I think for the first, as long as Napoli, I can't get health and Napoli out of my head. If Napoli's healthy, he really alters this lineup. And you add Brantley to that, and we were talking about just real quick, maybe we should have had the whole podcast on this, is we had a really quick with Joe Gerberry. We were talking about online today, you know, just the amount of pitches these guys are seeing. And right now, Napoli, I mean, he's not going to stay there, but Napoli's looking at, you know, 5.5 pitches per at bat. You've got Santana looking at 4.5 pitches per at bat. And you've got Brantley and Kipnis who look at 3.5 to 4 pitches per at bat. You put these guys back to back to back to back. I keep thinking back to that 07 Boston Red Sox team that just destroyed Cleveland pitching by taking pitches and fouling pitches off and really working starting pitchers. You want to talk about getting to Chris Sale. The best way to get to Chris Sale is make him throw 100 pitches before you get to the 6th inning or 7th inning. The innings are slowly starting to build a team that looks like that. So it should be interesting to see, and I'm sure Mike and I will be talking about this later in the week. It'll be interesting to see when Brantley comes back what the middle of this lineup can do, especially with a guy like Lindor in the mix too, who looks to be a guy who can take some pitches. We shall see. They could really do some damage to pitching. We got some surprises for you with the podcast coming up over the next couple of weeks. Look for August Fagerstrom, who did a podcast with Mike last week, to join us fairly regularly with Mike. Obviously, we've got a really great crew with Jeff Nomina, Adam Burke, Nino Cola, Danny Madden from Did the Tribe Win Last Night joining us, along with Mike and I. We have some surprise guests who I think are on their way sooner than you think. Maybe dropping before this podcast, not sure. If not dropping before, immediately after this one. So I think this one will probably drop tonight. This is Monday night. Check on Tuesday. We might have a surprise or two for you with maybe a name in Cleveland Indians writing lore who you haven't heard from in a long, long time, reappearing for hopefully more than just one guest appearance. That said, make sure you check out the website. We have great stuff. We have a lot of content. I have a piece that kind of got swallowed up by MLB.com, but Jan Gomes piece that I wrote on Saturday that I like a lot. Just check out the site. We've got a lot of good content. And, you know, listen to the podcasts. We got a lot of them, and I think they're pretty good. With that said, any last thoughts, Mike? And did you come up with a title yet?
I'm going to go with no title. Just going to live it up. Just gonna live it up with no title, because I have other things that I do. You know, Jim, you and I do other things on occasion with our lives. So
I'm coming up with a title. I'll try a couple more the next time we pod. How about super utility?
It just sounds like I'm a super tool, which
Well,
might be true.
Well, it depends on who you ask. I know there's a couple of people who think you're a super tool. Or no, I'm not even going to go there because that could change the whole take of this podcast. All right, we're going to stop there. Thanks for joining us at EHC the podcast. We will see you soon, and hopefully they'll actually play some baseball. Well, it's indoors and in Tampa, so at least it can't rain.